Hello, welcome to CMC Creative Keynote. I'm Sue Knott, Chair of the CMC Advisory Committee, and it's my great pleasure to host this keynote. Our creative keynotes are always special, but this year it really is. Have we ever needed our creativity as much as we do now, as professionals and as people? We're thrilled that despite everything that has been going on, we can be joined today by one of the most passionate advocates for creativity. #1 best-selling author-illustrator and the Waterstones Children's Laureate, Cressida Cowell. Cressida drew her first dragon when she was 9 years old. It is now the billion-dollar How to Train Your Dragon franchise with DreamWorks. She has sold over 11 million books worldwide and has won numerous prizes, including, and I like this particularly, Philosophy Now magazine's award for contributions in the fight against stupidity. Isn't that brilliant? Cressida is a fantastic example of what the innate creativity in children can achieve when it is encouraged. She's also an excellent example of tenacity. Internet problems meant the speech had to be recorded last week, and then a throat infection struck. Despite all that, she is to encourage us so that we can encourage our audiences. And don't forget, if you want to ask Cressida a question, use the heart icon in the top right of your screen. Cressida.
Vikings on the backs of dragons? The world just got a whole lot bigger.
This is amazing!
What happened here?
What could have done this?
I bet you think you know a lot about dragons. Let me show you some of what you don't know.
Should I know you?
No. You were only a babe. But a mother never forgets.
Hello, I'm Cressida Cowell, and I'm the author and the illustrator of the How to Train Your Dragon books and the Wizards of Once series, and I'm also the current Waterstones Children's Laureate in the UK. I'm thrilled to be asked by the organisers to be giving this year's keynote speech at the Children's Media Conference, and my speech is entitled Creativity is Magic and Magic is for Everyone. Usually I'd be standing in front of you in what my publicist calls my Lady Mary dress, with a lectern and a big screen. But I'm here in my writing shed, and actually this is quite a nice place to be giving the speech from, because this is where everything starts. This is the writing shed at the bottom of my garden in London, where I wrote and illustrated all the How to Train Your Dragon books and all the Wizards of Once series. And in fact, I've just finished a book, so it's looking like the book, you can't quite see here, but it's looking like the book has exploded all over the shed. So it feels like a good place. This is where everything starts. It ends up, in cinemas all around the world and and on television series. But, How to Train Dragons started here, just in this little shed. Everything has to start somewhere. I'm sitting in a pile of illustrations and like these ones. This is how things start, just as pencil and ink. That's Wish, the hero of my latest book. Just one of the giants. Piles and piles of this stuff. But this is how books start. So it feels very authentic to be giving, like this big guy, a speech on creativity in a place where things start. We need the magic of creativity now more than ever, not just in the creative industries, but in every industry. As Einstein said, no problem can be solved with the same mindset that created it. I love that sums up creativity from me. Children are the most creative people in the world. This is me speaking, not Einstein, because they don't know the rules yet. And we're going to need in the future not only creative artists, creative authors, we're going to need creative politicians, we're going to need creative scientists, we're going to need creative doctors. So we have to teach children to use that muscle of creativity, which is so inherent in them. How do we bring that creative spirit out? Again, I'm going to quote Einstein because he was such a clever man. If you want your children to be intelligent, read them fairy tales. If you want them to be more intelligent, read them more fairy tales. I have spent 20 years writing for children, and over those 20 years I have lost count of the times people have said to me, have you ever thought of writing for adults? As if writing for children was some sort of second best activity, something you do before you move on to the higher level of writing for adults. But you see, I find writing for children particularly illuminating. As children, we can get confused by trivialities. Children are focused on the essentials. I also often get asked if I'd ever wanted to move to Los Angeles and be a screenwriter for How to Train Your Dragon. And the answer to that question is no. I've never been a film writer. I've always been a book writer. When I was a little girl dreaming of what I wanted to possibly be one day, it was always to be an author, not a screenwriter. And however wonderful films might be, I shouldn't get distracted from my quest. And this is where I go back to children. Children always know what their quest is. They may seem not to be concentrating, but when it comes to fundamentals, children don't get distracted, and you have to remember that. I should pause here to say that I absolutely love the work that DreamWorks have done on How to Train Your Dragon. One of my philosophies is to partner with the best people and trust them to do their job. The most incredible team have worked on the movies. Producer Bonnie Arnold, she's amazing producer of first Toy Story. How lucky was I? Director Dean Dubois, who's a writer-director. He also wrote and co-directed that wonderful film Lilo and Stitch. Brilliant animation team. Honestly, POV, who designs all the sets, and Pierre-Olivier Fasson. Nico Marley designed all the characters. The music by John Powell. How lucky was I? Incredible artistry of all these people. The film was lit. All three films were lit by Roger Deakins. So these are dedicated, talented people beyond anything I could ever imagine. They've created something that's truly stunning and absolutely in the spirit of what I spent 15 years writing. Every time I watch the films, I get emotional, not just because the end result is so spectacular, but because something so personal to me becomes special to them, and that came across so beautifully on the screen. I like stories, you see, that move the reader, and in the case of film, the watcher, and that live with you all your life. Stories that make you laugh, make you cry, and make you think. And it's very difficult to do all those things at once, actually, because often the laughter undercuts the seriousness of what you're saying. So to be able to do that in what I'm trying to do in the books, which is to make you think and make you move you at the same time as making you laugh, is actually very difficult to do, and it's something that they really achieved in the films. And I like stories that ask the child and the adult watching with the child all the questions that I'm asking in the books. What makes a hero? What kind of leader do we need? What should be our relationship with the natural world? And so I am grateful to the movie makers beyond words that they captured that in the films. But my own personal quest is to create books and to play some small part in getting the children of today to read and write and draw with the same excitement and wonder that I did when I was a kid. And that can be harder children watch films and telly very easily because it's beamed into their head magically without them having to make an effort. Whereas books are something that they have to make an effort to access. They have to decode them. So that's my quest. I'm a book writer, not a film writer. And I think books are a medium for the reason that I've just described, that are under threat. Films don't need me in the same way that books do. So when asked for advice from young adults who want to go into the creative industries, I tell them to think carefully about what their own personal quest is. There's so many avenues and choices and diversions in life, and knowing your quest will help you navigate your path. I spent a lot of time in formal education. I studied English literature at Oxford, then I went to study illustration at Central St Martin's, followed by an MA in narrative illustration at Brighton. And consequently, in my 20s, I felt a little bit left behind my peer group. Everybody else seemed to be getting on with their lives, and I was such a long time in education. But looking back, I used every single part of my education. Even the Anglo-Saxon at Oxford inspired me to read the Norse sagas and became part of my interest in How to Train Your Dragon. And when I've got my first book published, I was determined to make my life in the creative industries work because I had to. I had a lot to prove. Despite having a tiny baby, not a lot of time, I had a core of determination in me because I knew from an early age that I wanted to write for children. One of my own first rules about writing for children is that there are no rules. Children teach you that as well. They're natural anarchists, so breaking the rules is going to attract them. A lot of the rules that kids learn in school, I break those rules all the time. I revel in language. I use buckets of similes and practically a metaphor a paragraph. And I didn't care if some people might say that was bad writing. I love books on writing. But somebody like Stephen King wrote a wonderful book on writing, which I love reading, but I break all these rules all the time. If writing and reveling in language is good enough for Dickens, it's good enough for me. And wouldn't it be a shame if we all wrote by like Hemingway or Elmore Leonard? Wonderful though those writers obviously are, they write in a very succinct and brief and magnificent way, but that's not my style. You have to know your own style and have confidence in it. At the beginning of writing Dragons and Wizards, I made the decision that I had to, if I was going to write these books for 8 to 12-year-olds and their parents and their carers, books that get kids reading, they'll have to be funny and clever and visually packed adventure stories that get kids thinking. So I was very ambitious right from the beginning in what I was going to do. They were going to have to be very child attractive for children. They're going to have to actually look like sweets and look at actual books. The covers even look like sweets, glittery and like something that they want to feel and they want to touch and they want to pick up. So there'd be mass market books, but they would also be intelligent mass market books. And those choices I make at the beginning affect everything about the way I write the story and how I present it. Not only is there hot competition nowadays for children's time and attention nowadays, books can also suffer from being perceived by children as something old-fashioned and schooly. I've talked about that. The whole decoding process of learning to read can mean that in a child's mind, books can come to be associated with something that's difficult or a struggle. In the case of a child who has dyslexia or some other learning difficulty, that can even in extreme cases come to represent something that makes them feel stupid, even when they're not stupid at all. And how can you love something that makes you feel stupid? So I work very, very hard to overturn that impression and to make sure that the stories are worth the effort the child has to put in to access them. When I was a kid living on a little island in the 1970s with no telly on it, have I got a picture of that island? I probably do somewhere here. Yes, this is the actual island that inspired the Isle of Burke. It's nothing like being in writing shed to be able to show you stuff there. That's the little island that inspired the Isle of Burke. I was prepared to put up with some boring bits, But nowadays, children are used to watching the most wonderful films and television, so I have to bear in mind that their attention span might be less good than mine was. So the storylines are pacey and thrilling with lots of cliffhangers, and I pay a huge amount of attention to the visual aspect of the story. I pack my books full of illustrations and, huge. Handily, I've got illustrations like this one. This is from my latest book that are very scrawly, and you can see the mark making in that illustration that sort of drags the child through the story and makes it feel like something exciting, that they're sweet like these, not Brussels sprouts. And I also try and make them look like something that the child could do themselves. A lot of the illustrations are rather childlike. I have some very epic illustrations. This is the kind of illustration that makes you feel like the world might be real. So there's a lot of detail in that type of illustration. But a lot of the illustrations are also very, very scrawly and very and very sort of immediate, and so the child feels like they can do themselves. So that's trying to get the child to think that they could make it themselves. I'm trying to get them writing as well as reading, and that's part of my job as a writer as well, is to kickstart children's creativity. So I also break up the text with capitals and change the fonts, all within a reasonably short page extent, so as not to be too intimidating. The plots are wildly unexpected, and they rattle along slightly out of control. They're sort of roller coaster energy, and which makes things exciting. But I also have to make space for the tender moments, the thoughtful moments. So it's like a piece of music, really. I'm balancing, text and illustration and humour and thoughtfulness, all in quite a small space. So that's a really, I do think there's a real parallel with music there. And for me, I always like to make that feeling of slightly out of control, a sort of energy with which I do my mark making. Showing this is so great to have the option to show all of these pictures. The energy of the mark making that contributes to the feeling that the text is slightly, the story is slightly out of control. It's very important. I learnt this from reading Roald Dahl. On the first page of James and the Giant Peach, James's parents are eaten up in full daylight by an angry rhinoceros. And from that moment on, you're on the edge of your seat. You're thinking, how far is this particular author prepared to go? Too far. And that's exciting if you know something is always going to be all right in the end. Where's the tension? Where's the drama? Game of Thrones would be an adult example. From the moment Sean Bean dies in Game of Thrones, all bets are off. Anything can happen. The most important thing when you're writing for children is to engage the kid. So absolutely the first thing you have to do is create a character that they care about. Because if you don't do that, you can do anything with a plot, but nobody cares if you drop the character off the cliff. If they don't care about the character, your story is dead. So you have to create characters, engaging hero characters who the reader minds about. And my heroes, I'm trying to present children with a different kind of hero, with a hero who doesn't solve problems like Stoic does by punching them. I create heroes like Hiccup, who solves problems with his creativity. The hero qualities I'm presenting children with are the qualities that I think that we all need. Hiccup is an inventor. He solves problems through his creativity, through his empathy, and his intelligence. Creativity, empathy, intelligence. Same with the hero of my Wizards Once series, Wish, who solves problems again through her. She has a magic eye, and I was showing. Yes, this is Wish's magic eye that she has beneath her eye patch, which can see into other people's minds. Creativity And she can also move things. Empathy and creativity are her hero qualities. I write the books to be read aloud, and that is a key factor in getting a child to read for the joy of it. Books read to you in your parents' voice live with you all your life. Books, of course, can be read, films are always watched with an adult in a cinema for young children, but books can be read independently by children, but mine are deliberately written to be read aloud by an adult, because books read to you in your parents' voice live with you all your life, and reading a book aloud is a shared joy and sends an important message to the child being read to. Books are important. Books are powerful, magical things that can make your dad cry or your mum laugh and have the sort of wisdom in them that can change your life. So with reading aloud in mind, I think about the books as a performance, and the mouthfeel of the word, the loudness or softness or bellowiness of the characters. And it's why I give Toothless a stammer, and Screech and the sprites in Wizard of Once a bit of a hissy lisp, and Sycorax's voice is mild as the point of an icicle, so that they make a joyous acting performance, particularly if you're lucky enough to have David Tennant reading them and narrating them as he does with both How to Train Your Dragon and Wizards.
A Gronkle can fly backwards, sideways, and even hover. They chew rocks, melting them in their bellies and firing them as balls of molten lava. But they are lazy. They have even been known to fall asleep while flying, waking only when they crash into the ocean or into the side of a mountain.
And I never ever dumb down. Children are natural philosophers, naturally curious, natural linguists. I presuppose the intelligence of children, because if you underestimate children, I think you tend to create a self-fulfilling prophecy. All children are so intelligent. There's nothing I put into the books that children don't pick up on, however complicated the point. My job is to engage their questioning spirit, and I think you can write for the mass market in both movies and in books and still make things intelligent. So these are the questions I'm asking the kids in these little fantasy books about dragons and wizards. Do we live in a world of determinism or free will? Can we influence our own individual fates and the fate of our society? What makes a great leader? What makes a great parent? How should we look after the environment? Is it ever justifiable to go to war? And it all sounds rather grand, but I take a lot of care to present it as fun. And if you present things as fun, you can get away with so much stuff. Take the Dragonese, for example. It can just be enjoyed because it's a very silly language that says things like, "Me mama na like it yum yum on de bum," which means my mother does not like to be bitten on the bottom. But there are other ways the language is used to get them to think about things from a different angle. This is creativity in action. The Dragonese word for window is air square, which invites the reader to think. A window is the frame that shapes the window, but it's also the square of air inside the frame. Many of the words force you to see things from a dragon's point of view. Mice are squeaky snacks, dogs are dimwolves. So that's looking at things. There's a word in Dragonese for the largest number that anybody's ever heard of, and then add one. And that makes a child think, how can there be a largest number that anybody's ever heard of if you can still add one to it? That's philosophical thinking. That's what language can do. And children engage with it because it's fun. It's presented as fun. Creating for children is often a balance between having the courage to take something silly and make it serious and meaningful, and taking something serious and having the courage to make it a bit silly. Studying at St Martin's in illustration taught me to stick to my guns, because when everybody else stood up and said, "This is my project on death," and then the next person would say, "This is my project on the rise of Nazi Germany," and then I would have to present my work on Mr. Orange, the talking carrot. But the talking carrot can also represent something equally worthwhile. When I was made Children's Laureate last year, my speech was entitled "Reading is Magic and Magic is for Everyone." So I'd like now to expand that statement to "Creativity is magic and magic is for everyone." The everyone part is important. One of the key points on my Waterson's Children's Laureate Charter is every child has the right to see themselves reflected in a book. If children don't see children like themselves in books or writers like themselves, there's a real danger that they may think that the creativity found in books and in the writers of books are a magic that isn't for them. And this is true in film too. I was at the Governor's Awards last October where Gina Davis received an Oscar in Los Angeles for her campaigning work about representation in the screen industries, which involves a lot of data collection. And her speech was really sobering about the situation we're still in today regarding representation. A couple of things she said really stood out. You are far more likely to be treated by a white male doctor on screen than you actually are in real life. That's ridiculous. I mean, surely screen, it should be better than real life. The amount of female directors who've been nominated for an Oscar is truly embarrassing in 2020, let alone winning an Oscar. I think one female director has ever won an Oscar. That's a worry. So, books and magic and creativity and are for everyone, and creation is for everyone. Coming back to my shed and lockdown, what's been clearer than ever over the last few months is that children's creativity should not be underestimated. I've been overwhelmed by the drawings and stories sent to me. Children have an explosive enthusiasm, a need to express their ideas, and a talent for innovation that surpasses a lot of adults. Creativity is infectious, an ocean of never-ending waves, something created by me here, as I said, in this shed at the bottom of my garden in London, ends up being a film and a television, but not only that, but also thousands and drawings and stories by children who've read my stories and are inspired to create their own. It's a skill that children have innately, but they do need to be encouraged, which is why I've been running a summer creativity camp for children. Creativity is not a soft skill. The creative industries make over £100 billion a year for the UK economy in 2018. And creativity, as I said at the beginning of this talk, is increasingly important in a complex world. It's the case for every child, not just some children. Children need and deserve equality of access not only to books, but also equality of access to the time and tools to develop their own creativity. In my Waterstones Children's Laureate Charter, I have a point that children have the right to be creative for at least 15 minutes a week without being marked. No rules, no marking, just fun. Some space in their school week. And teachers want to do this, but they're often so cramped for time that they can't provide even that just 15 minutes a week without being marked. No rules, no marking, just fun. Children are so creative because they don't know the rules yet, and they can have insights that we should be listening to. I am so glad that the Children's Media Conference has its Inspiring Change Makers as part of the regular programme, because they will have ideas, ambitions we should be listening to. I drew my first dragon at the age of 9. I've got here my writing notebook that a rather imaginative teacher got me doing when I was about 9, because my handwriting wasn't very good and my spelling was terrible. But in this book, she allowed me to write without her marking it, and you can see, the handwriting is a bit scribbly, and I've spelt my own name wrong. My name is Cressida. I've spelt it Cressida. But in this book, I'm drawing the sprites that later turned into my Wizards of Once books. And in other drawing books at the same time, I drew dragons that later on turned into this $1 billion franchise. I was drawing those age 9, so things have to start somewhere. So I had ideas and enthusiasm. I had one very wonderful teacher who allowed me to write without marking, and who inspired me. So I think there must be so many children out there like me that we need to tap into that potential. Every child deserves the same. Creativity is magic, and we need every single child to grow up with creative skills, no matter what job they have. I'm going to repeat this because this is so important. Now more than ever, when there are so many hydra-headed political and scientific and environmental challenges facing the world, we need people. We need creative people, people like you, who think innovatively and outside the box in order to train the decision makers of tomorrow to think also innovatively and outside the box. We should be so proud of our creative industries. And part of my role as Children's Laureate is to champion how vital what we do is and how important it is to all of us, that we stay a leader. The UK stays a leader on the world stage as it is right now, going into the future. So thank you, everybody, for all the work that you do and for listening to me today.
So many top tips and timely advice. Thank you so much, Cressida. And now Cressida is joining us not live from her shed. Hello, Cressida. Are you there now? Hi.
Hello. Hi.
Hello. Are you better now?
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
That's brilliant. So we've got a few questions coming in. So you'll be pleased to hear. First of all, you mentioned the creativity camp that you're running. I think you started this week.
Yes.
How's that been going?
Oh, it's been wonderful. We've been so lucky. We've got so many wonderful speakers. We've got we've got Owen Colfer, who wrote Artemis Fowl. He's speaking on Friday. He's doing a writing masterclass. We've got Chris Riddell. We've got you have to look. It's basically on booktrust.org.uk. And for every day, one day is Poetry Day. Today is Poetry Day. Tomorrow is Laureates Around the World, reading aloud. Monday was Ideas Day, and we've got a gallery where we peek inside the notebooks of Michael Morpurgo and Anne Fine. And anyway, it's wonderful. And children are responding so imaginatively, and that's wonderful.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'm actually rather envious. I wish I could actually join in.
You can, Sue, you can. What's rather lovely is I'm getting a lot of parents, of course, because they're homeschooling at the moment. A lot of parents are actually joining in, and there's sort of draw-alongs. Tuesday was drawing day. And so a lot of the children submitted their drawing work, but then the parents were doing it with them. They were submitting their drawing work. So it's all trying to kickstart creativity and get children thinking creatively. And then some of them may think that this is an industry that they might want to go into. They might go into that area. So that's
so important. That's fantastic. Another question here. You said your shed was like an explosion. How do you come down from your imaginary world after writing the end?
Oh my goodness, I have to say, yes. I'm not in the shed, by the way, now. I'm in my sister's house because the internet is terrible in my shed. So I sort of, shutting a shed door is one of the reasons why a shed is a good thing is that you go into your own world and you can shut the door on it afterwards. However, I get very imaginatively, I get very caught up. And so I've just finished the last book in my Wizards of Once series, the series I wrote after How to Train Your Dragon. And I have to say, I was crying. I cried for about a week because it's very difficult for the characters not to feel real to you. And for it, I always think that you have to put something of yourself into whatever you do. And so ending that series, it was very close to the things I was talking about, very close to my heart. So yes, I find it difficult to end things.
can imagine. There's another question coming here from a fellow writer.
Yes.
She says, thanks for such an inspiring keynote. I wonder what your dream commission would be right here, right now, and how would recent lockdown experiences impact upon your approach? She says, "Oh, and I love your shed."
Commission. Now, you see, I have never really, so somebody coming along and commissioning me to do something. You see, I haven't really done that. Mostly, I initiate my own projects, and that's not necessarily to say that that's the way you should do it. Everybody's different, but because my work is quite personal, it tends to come out of my own passions, my own childhood, the things I'm interested. So commission. I haven't really done work to commission. I've worked with illustrators. You know, I've had my own work illustrated by others, and of course made into films and plays. But I've never really done a commission. That's interesting. That's a very interesting question. I'm already wondering why that is.
I think probably people would think you're very lucky.
Yeah, but I am lucky. I'm very lucky.
Another question is coming. This questioner says, I produced the panel about listening better to kids. Do you have advice for creators and parents on how to better listen to kids when they're being creative?
How to better? Yes. I mean, I think it's very tempting as a parent to try and improve your child's work a lot. I mean, that's quite a tempting thing to do. And you mustn't lose sight of the fact that it's very, very important for them, particularly when they're little, to also just learn to love writing. The little book that I showed you, in fact, I think I've got it somewhere here. The little book I showed you that I did when I was little, I have to say, it showed no signs of a genius whatsoever. That, you know, the ideas were rather cliched, and a lot of the stories I was writing at the time, I was copying the stories of writers that I admire. So I was writing things, I loved Enid Blyton, so I was writing The Secret 11 or something, you know. But what I was doing then, that was very important. I was learning to enjoy writing. And so you mustn't forget that that's almost the most key thing for them to learn. And particularly, I think at school at the moment, there's a lot of emphasis on skills, not just, spelling and, but also how you construct a story, do your story plan, all of that. I think a little bit more encouragement needs to go into the child just learning to love expressing themselves. And I get a lot of feedback from parents at saying, my child used to love writing, but now they can't even put pencil to paper because they're thinking, has it got a wow word? You know, is it exciting enough? They're almost sort of, there's a bit too much of the criticism, the self-criticism, and not quite enough of the joy. And so that's something that as parents, you mustn't forget, and that they have to write about what interests them, as well as, school asks them to do.
I couldn't agree more. It's brilliant. Yeah. Another question. How long did it take you to get published, and how did it feel when you got your first agent or publication?
I was incredibly lucky with in the sense that, as I said in that speech, I was in education for a very long time, so 10 years. And so I think I was 30 when I had my first book published, and I just left St Martin's Art School. I'd been doing my MA. But interestingly, a great friend of mine at school, who's called Lauren Child, who is writer of Charlie and Lola, she, like me, had the same, she longed to be a children's book writer, and she and I she didn't go through the whole education thing, but she took 10 years to have her first book published. So I was very lucky. I immediately actually, I'll tell you what it was that I entered this competition called the Macmillan Children's Book Competition. And I wrote a story for that. It was open to students, and it was a sort of, Macmillan Institute is a sort of a way in from students into the profession. And I won a prize in that competition, and that's where I met my first editor. So I was very lucky, but you can be incredibly talented, and like Lauren, and it can take you 10 years, and there's no reason why that should be. I think there is a certain amount of luck with it. But I do also have a real, I try and support as many of those kind of prizes as possible. There's, in fact, I wrote there's a new prize called the Carmelite Prize, which is for art students all over the country. And they're competing to illustrate a picture book text, and I wrote the first text for that, remembering my own start in life, because I was lucky, but a lot of people, it can take ages. I mean, I think it's a question of just being persistent and keeping on.
Thank you. Yes. Another question's come through. First of all, says, thank you so much for sharing such an inspiring and magic-filled speech with us all. Much appreciation. That's coming through. That's coming through a lot of appreciation, Cressida. This person says, do you have advice for writers with dreams of having their works translated into TV and film? Also, with How to Train Your Dragon, did you pitch the concept or were you approached for it?
No, this is what is so interesting. I mean, it's interesting that my hero is called Hiccup because it means accident. I mean, I really did not conceive of How to Train Your Dragon as a film. I wrote it to work. I mean, if I had, I wouldn't have written a 12-book series because that's not very convenient for making into a film. No, I wrote it absolutely with it being a book series. Didn't even. The only thing is I suppose is I knew I was competing with films, so I did make it very exciting, very adventure-packed, very visual, because I know I'm competing with film. So in a way, it was kind of filmic, but it wasn't because I was thinking it was going to be made into a film. It was just because I felt I was competing with films. So in fact, I mean, I think that it's quite important that books aren't written as if they were screenplays. You know, books are a different medium. They have different strengths to films. And I think there is a strength that we don't. So I was reveling in language. I talked quite a lot about language. We actually couldn't make the Dragonese, or they couldn't make the Dragonese work in film because you'd have to have subtitles, and tiny kids can't have subtitles. So, and in the books, you know, nobody climbs on the back of a dragon until book 6. You know, you can't have a film in which nobody. So I really didn't write them to be made into films. So that was just a total accident. I think, you know, they approached me and I didn't think that he would ever. And in fact, I got a lot of television interest as well, some of which I said no to at the time. That's interesting looking back, because back then television just didn't have the special effects that, you know, the dragons needed to be something wondrous. And so I said no to a lot of television. And then DreamWorks came along and I just thought, you know, they could do a wonderful job. But I never thought they'd actually do it. You never think that's going to happen.
That's brilliant. Brilliant. A couple more questions. We're actually running out of time, but I'll try and fit in a couple more questions because so many people want to hear from you. How do you exercise your creativity in social media?
In social media? That's really interesting. I'm on. Hang on. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, and I suppose exercise my creativity. I'm not quite sure. I suppose I just try and support as many creative people as possible. My Instagram account, I have to say, is more personal. That tends to be. I'm often trying to communicate with my family, with my children on Instagram. Because they're on it. Twitter, I suppose I'm trying to support the work of other creatives and creativity in general. That's generally what I'm trying to do on Twitter. And it's very, social media. It is. Oh, it's a difficult. It's not any. You should never have an argument on Twitter. Do not have an argument because it's not a medium for an argument, and misunderstandings can happen. So I always try and avoid having any kind of argument. But I think it's a great way of telling people what you're doing, and the creativity camp, the creativity summer camp. That's very much, we've launched it on social media, and then you can see it on YouTube, so I'm using those channels for that kind of thing. It's a great way of accessing children. And the YouTube thing is great. It's fantastic. It's all free as well, which is very important at the moment, children being able to access things, free. So I use it much more than I thought I would at the beginning.
Great. Right, well, we're fast running out of time. In fact, we have really, but I'm going to go over it a little bit.
Oh, go
break the rules. Break the rules. I'm learning by your example.
There are rules.
It's a good question. What have you learnt most from being the Children's Laureate?
Sadly, I've gone into lockdown quite quickly into the laureateship, which is a shame. But they have extended my laureateship by another year, so I'm going to get to be laureate for 3 years rather than 2. So I'm very pleased about that, because I've got a really ambitious programme, not just to do with creativity, but also to do with libraries, school libraries in particular. So that's very important. I'm very happy that they've extended my laureateship, because I want to do a real campaign to do with school libraries, because there are so many children who don't have access to a school library. I think it's something terrifying, like 1 in 5 schools don't have it. No, 1 in 8 schools don't have a library. I can't remember the statistics, but it's just not good enough. So my programme is going to be extended, but one of the things that I think, being a children's author, not just a laureate, is always instructive, and you always learn a lot, because children have a lot to teach you. And being a children's author nowadays involves going into a lot of schools and meeting a lot of kids. And that's very instructive. I find meeting the children and hearing their questions and trying to look through the eyes of a child is a very instructive thing to do. And being a laureate is lovely, because you can get to do these things to do with libraries and to do with creativity, and you get a platform to do that. So I've really embraced that. I've loved that.
Thank you. And finally, this isn't a question. I mean, there are other questions coming through, but we just haven't got time. But I think I couldn't say it better than this person who's come on to say, Colin from 16 South says, Cressida, thank you so much for this brilliant keynote. It was so refreshing. I think as the kids' television industry, we often fail because we dumb down story and forget that kids are smarter than most of us. You're a fresh reminder to push higher, dream bigger, and open our minds to listen to the kid inside of us. I couldn't have said it better myself. So thank you for that. Thank you for that, Colin. And I think you're able to stay with us, I think, for 30 minutes on the back chat after we finish. So which would be brilliant. So people who haven't had their questions answered live perhaps can actually ask you on the back chat. But before you leave us now, while we're thinking about creativity, I should just say it's worth taking a look at 2 very different but both incredibly inspiring views on creative communication in our Art of strand in the VOD content. One of the most popular speakers ever at CMC, Ash Perrin, returns with the art of playful communication. And Elisa Khan-Whelan, a member of the now world-famous Egg Gang, who turned a single picture of an egg into a record-breaking social media phenomenon, describes the art of going viral. Tomorrow morning, we reconvene with Write On, a live session for writers and those who work with them. That's at 11 a.m. And finally, don't forget tonight's quiz. It starts at 8 p.m. and goes on till 10, so you may need a drink or two. You also need to find your Zoom invitation because it's not on this platform. So it says here, hosted by someone who almost got into BBC Radio 1's Top of the Form quiz in 1986, Steve Wynn will entertain you for at least an hour and a bit whilst you attempt to keep up with his drinking, which you won't. Prizes include a Nintendo Game Boy, front-loading VCR player with remote, Mousetrap board game, and a strawberry blonde mug. These are the real prizes. I am reliably informed. Okay, thank you very much for joining us, and Backchat is opening now for 30 minutes. Cheerio.